November 18, 1942, above Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. A Japanese Zero pilot gripped his control stick tightly as he spotted unusual aircraft climbing fast from the airstrip. These American fighters had a strange look, twin booms and twin tails, but they were rising with a speed he had never seen before. On this day, the 339th Fighter Squadron became the very first Lightning pilots to challenge Japanese fighters, a turning point that would shake Japanese faith in their long-standing air dominance. Later, the shaken pilot would report to his commander at Rabaul, describing aircraft that defied everything Japanese naval aviation doctrine had taught. The P-38 Lightning, which intelligence had once dismissed as too heavy and clumsy, had just climbed from sea level to combat altitude faster than his Mitsubishi A6M could follow. For years, the Zero had reigned supreme. In China, over the Philippines, and even at Pearl Harbor, no Allied plane could rival its climb rate or agility. Yet above Guadalcanal, an island already soaked in blood, American twin-engine fighters were dictating the fight from heights the Zero could not reach. During this first encounter, the P-38s of the 339th Squadron claimed 3 Japanese aircraft. They attacked from above, turning the Zero's legendary maneuverability into a weakness. The rules of air combat were no longer written in dogfighting manuals. They were being rewritten in the skies, where superior altitude and speed now ruled. For Japanese pilots, the myth of invincibility was beginning to collapse. The truth was that Japan's air supremacy had been eroding long before that November day, though few in the Imperial Navy wanted to admit it. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese aviators had spread fear across the Pacific, backed by the Zero's incredible range, tight turns, and skilled pilots. At its critical altitude, the Zero could reach 332 millipars and outturn any Allied fighter. Among Japan's aces was Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, one of the most respected pilots of the war. By 1942, he had already scored 13 victories in the Borneo campaign and would eventually claim 64 kills. His confidence and that of his comrades seemed unshakable. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, Sakai's commander, told his men that American fighters over Guadalcanal likely came from carriers, probably the F-4F Wildcat, a type the Japanese had defeated before. In early 1942, this belief appeared justified. The Japanese had destroyed outdated Brewster Buffaloes over Singapore, crushed Curtiss P-40 Warhawks over Java, and overwhelmed British Hurricanes over Burma. The Zero stood virtually unchallenged. Even when new Allied planes entered the fight, Japanese pilots relied on years of combat experience in China to maintain their edge. But by mid-1942, intelligence reports hinted at a new American fighter. Twin engines, twin tails, heavy firepower concentrated in the nose. Most Japanese officers dismissed these reports. How could a twin-engine plane ever compete with the nimble Zero? Japanese doctrine focused on decisive battles and the skill of individual pilots had no answer for what was about to appear. The P-38 Lightning was unlike any other fighter of the war. It was Lockheed's answer to a 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps request for a long-range interceptor. Designed by Clarence Kelly Johnson and his team, the Lightning could exceed 400 mph, climb to 40,000 feet, and fly over 1,000 miles. Its 2 Allison V-1710 engines, each producing 1,150 horsepower with turbo-superchargers, gave it performance Japan's engineers had never imagined. The Zero had been designed for maneuverability at all costs, even leaving out armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks in early models. The P-38 was built on a different idea: speed, altitude, firepower, and survivability. When the first Lightnings arrived in Australia, they were plagued by technical problems and their debut was delayed. But by late 1942, these issues had been fixed, and experienced P-40 pilots were transitioning to the new fighter. Units like the 49th Fighter Group still flew P-40s but were preparing to switch to P-38s. These men had already learned through hard lessons never to fight a Zero in a turning battle. The Lightning gave them the weapon to fight on their own terms. Then came first blood over the Solomon Islands. On November 18, 1942, the 339th Fighter Squadron escorted B-17 flying fortresses and clashed with Japanese fighters. The sight stunned both sides. Japanese pilots, escorting their bombers, first assumed the strange twin-tailed aircraft were reconnaissance planes. But the speed of their climb quickly told a different story. Within moments, the Lightnings had gained a 5,000-foot altitude advantage. From there, they took control of the fight. The P-38s patrolled above the altitude where the Zero could fight effectively. Their speed at high levels let them choose when and where to attack. Diving from above, they tore into the Japanese formations. The difference was clear. While the Zero excelled at slow-speed maneuvering, its controls stiffened badly at higher speeds. Above 250 mph, it became sluggish. Above 300 mph, it was nearly unmanageable. The P-38, with hydraulically boosted controls in later models, could handle high-speed dives approaching 500 mph with ease. The era of the Zero's dominance was ending. The P-38 Lightning had arrived, and with it the balance of air power in the Pacific was beginning to shift forever. The technological divide. For Japanese pilots, the shock went far beyond raw numbers on a chart. The P-38 Lightning represented an entirely different philosophy of aerial combat, one that Japanese military thinking had never prepared for. Its weapons layout alone showed this difference, with 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon grouped in the nose. The Lightning delivered all of its firepower in a single, concentrated stream. Unlike wing-mounted weapons, this setup eliminated the need for complex convergence adjustments, making every burst deadly accurate. The P-38's turbo-supercharged engines were just as revolutionary. Not only did they allow the fighter to maintain strong performance at high altitudes, but the turbo-superchargers also muffled the exhaust, making the Lightning surprisingly quiet. Japanese pilots often never realized a P-38 was near, until tracer fire was already tearing past their cockpits. By comparison, the Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine produced 950 horsepower at sea level, but lost power rapidly with altitude. At 20,000 feet, it dropped to barely 750 horsepower. The P-38's Allison V1710 engines, supported by turbo-superchargers, maintained their strength far higher, giving the Lightning total control in vertical combat. The psychological shock. By early 1943, the mental toll on Japanese pilots was becoming clear in both unit reports and personal letters. The carefully built myth of the Zero's invincibility, first established in China, was breaking apart. Pilots spoke of constant strain, never knowing when a P-38 might strike from above. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima once encountered what became known as a double-team maneuver. 2 Grumman Wildcats attacked him together. He easily got behind one, but before he could fire, the second dived in from the side and forced him into a desperate retreat. Furious, Nakajima returned to Rabaul shaken. That was against Wildcats, far less capable than the P-38. Even Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous ace, later admitted the truth. He explained that Zero pilots could no longer engage P-38s successfully, except under the rarest conditions, and those chances almost never appeared. His words carried enormous weight among the pilot corps. The P-38's reach. The Lightning's range only deepened Japan's problems. With a reach of 1,600 miles using drop tanks, P-38s could escort bombers into the heart of Japanese-held territory or sweep across skies far from American bases. Japanese pilots could no longer rely on numerical advantage even over their own islands. The ultimate demonstration came with the Yamamoto mission. On April 18, 1943, 16 P-38s launched Operation Vengeance, a 435-mile overwater interception to kill Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The plan demanded precise navigation, extreme range, and the ability to fight both bombers and their escorts. Major John Mitchell led the flight. His pilots skimmed the ocean at 50 feet to avoid radar, then climbed sharply to strike. The results stunned Japan. Yamamoto, their most respected naval leader flying with 6 Zero escorts, was hunted down and killed. Zero pilot Kenji Yanaga, who flew as part of the escort, later recalled his disbelief as the Lightnings appeared from nowhere, struck with precision, and escaped before the Zeros could react. The Americans had timed their interception to the exact minute, striking as Yamamoto's planes descended to land. The message to Japan's naval aviators was devastating. America now had both the technology and the planning ability to match any leader, any mission, anywhere. Tactical evolution. As 1943 went on, American pilots perfected tactics to take full advantage of the Lightning. The boom and zoom attack, diving from high altitude, firing and climbing away before the enemy could respond, became their trademark. Against such methods, Zero pilots were nearly powerless. The numbers told the story. In the very first air-to-air clash between P-38s and Japanese fighters, 15 Japanese aircraft were destroyed for the loss of only one Lightning. Similar one-sided victories became common as Americans gained more experience in the cockpit. Japan tried to respond. Pilots experimented with dive brakes to force overshoots, attempted to drag P-38s into low-level turning fights, and tested looser formations to spot incoming attacks. None of it worked consistently. The gap in performance was too great. Industry and innovation. The Lightning's superiority revealed a larger truth. American industry could not only match but surpass Japan's aviation efforts. By the end of the war, over 10,000 P-38s had been produced in 18 different versions, each one improved based on combat lessons. The P-38J, introduced in late 1943, was a perfect example. It added hydraulically boosted ailerons for faster roll rates, solved cockpit heating problems that plagued earlier models in Europe, and improved turbo-superchargers for even greater altitude performance. Meanwhile, Japan struggled to squeeze improvements from the aging Zero design. Captain Minoru Genda, a key planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, privately admitted in 1943, "We are not simply fighting a better fighter. We are facing a system of constant improvement that we cannot equal. Every new American plane we see is better than the last." Pilot quality gap. The divide widened further with pilot training. By mid-1943, Japan was losing veteran aviators faster than they could be replaced. Training, once nearly 2 years long, was cut to less than 6 months. Many new pilots entered combat units with under 200 hours of flight time. By contrast, American pilots often arrived with 400 to 600 hours of training. They practiced advanced combat maneuvers, studied gun camera footage from real battles, and flew multiple aircraft types before reaching the front. The difference in preparation was dramatic, and in the skies over the Pacific it showed. The P-38 Lightning was more than just another fighter. It was proof that superior technology, industry, and training could overturn even the fiercest reputation. For Japanese pilots, it marked the beginning of a struggle they could never win. When American pilots transitioned to the P-38, they received advanced training not only in twin-engine flying, but also in high-altitude combat tactics, mechanical reliability, and survivability. The Lightning's twin-engine design gave it a crucial edge Japanese pilots had not expected: survivability. Even when badly damaged, many P-38s returned to base on just one engine. For American crews, this meant confidence in their aircraft. For Japanese Zero pilots flying single-engine planes over endless ocean, engine failure almost always meant death or capture. The Zero's long range was achieved by sacrificing protection, leaving it with little armor and fuel tanks that were not self-sealing. A single hit could turn a mission into a fiery disaster or a hopeless struggle in shark-infested waters. Intelligence warnings. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence openly cautioned pilots about the Lightning. Reports described its devastating dive speed, deadly accuracy, and habit of striking from nowhere. A captured Japanese document from December 1943 even declared, "The P-38 type fighter must be considered the most dangerous American aircraft in the Pacific. Its speed and climb rate exceed anything we can achieve. Engagement should be avoided unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority and advantageous position." For pilots raised on a warrior code that glorified seeking combat, these orders to avoid the enemy were crushing to morale. The rise of American P-38 aces. The achievements of American pilots proved the Lightning's dominance. Major Richard "Dick" Bong became the top U.S. ace of the war with 40 victories, all earned in the P-38. Major Thomas B. McGuire scored 38 victories before being killed in January 1945. Their records, built in less than 2 years, surpassed the tallies of many Japanese aces who had been flying since 1937 or 1938. By the war's end, P-38s had destroyed more than 1,800 Japanese aircraft, eliminating not just planes but irreplaceable veteran pilots. Each loss further weakened Japan's already strained air force. Continuous technical progress. While Japan's aircraft development lagged, the P-38 kept advancing. By 1944, the P-38L introduced stronger engines for better high-altitude performance, improved cooling systems, and underwing rocket launchers for ground attack. These fighters carried heavy bomb loads while still excelling in air combat, proving the Lightning was not only a fighter, but also a versatile strike platform. Japanese pilots soon realized they were facing not just a plane, but a complete weapons system that could dominate in multiple roles. Cultural shock in the air war. The contrast in doctrine was equally striking. Japanese pilots saw combat as a test of skill and spirit, where bravery and aerobatics were decisive. Americans approached it as a technical challenge, using engineering, training, and tactics to achieve victory. Commander Masatake Okumiya later admitted, "After the war, we could not accept that fighting spirit alone was insufficient. Every report of P-38 superiority was met with demands for greater dedication, more aggressive spirit. We confused courage with capability. This refusal to adapt left Japanese squadrons relying on outdated methods against an opponent who never stopped improving. Night fighting and radar. By mid-1944, some P-38s carried early airborne radar, allowing them to hunt at night. For Japan, this was an alarming development. Darkness, once a safe haven for operations, was no longer secure. The Marianas and the collapse of Japanese air power. Although the P-38 did not take part in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, its earlier impact had already stripped Japan of its most skilled aviators. Years of attrition against Lightnings and other American fighters left only poorly trained replacements to face the U.S. Navy's Hellcats. The battle, later remembered as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, where over 300 Japanese aircraft were destroyed, was the final proof that Japanese air power had collapsed. Vice Admiral Saburo Ozawa later admitted, "Our pilots were not ready. They had neither the experience nor the aircraft to match the Americans." The war in the air had been lost long before that day. Desperation and failed counters. As 1944 gave way to 1945, Japanese efforts to counter the Lightning grew desperate. Tactics included ramming attacks, specialized anti-aircraft shells designed to ignite P-38 fuel tanks, and rushed attempts to field twin-engine fighters of their own. The Kawasaki Ki-102 was the closest attempt, but it arrived only in 1945. Just 238 were built, and they were slower, climbed poorly, and suffered from constant engine problems. Against the P-38, it was no contest. The end of Japanese air power. By early 1945, Japanese pilots no longer spoke about winning air superiority. They spoke only about survival. The P-38 Lightning, along with other advanced American fighters, had achieved complete control of the skies over the Pacific. Saburo Sakai would later admit that the P-38 Lightning broke the spirit of the Zero fighter pilots. The numbers prove it. P-38 operations in the Pacific revealed overwhelming dominance. More than 1,800 Japanese aircraft were destroyed by Lightning pilots. Major Richard Bong became America's top ace with 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas B. McGuire scored 38 victories before being killed in January 1945. No other Army Air Force fighter type claimed as many Japanese aircraft. On the other side, Japan's losses were catastrophic. By 1945, over 90% of the skilled pilots who had started the war were gone. The average Japanese flyer by the final year had less than 100 hours of training. These were not seasoned warriors anymore, but inexperienced men sent against an enemy they had little chance of defeating. Revelations after the war, following Japan's surrender. American occupation forces carried out extensive interviews with surviving Japanese aviators and commanders. These accounts revealed just how deeply the Lightning had damaged Japanese confidence. Commander Masatake Okumiya admitted, "The P-38 broke our confidence completely. We had believed in our superiority, in our aircraft, in our training. The Lightning showed us we were wrong about everything. It wasn't just faster or better armed. It represented a way of war we couldn't match." One Japanese pilot confessed, "On my first confrontation with the P-38, I was astonished to find an American aircraft that could outrun, outclimb, and outdive the Zero, which we thought was the most superior fighter plane in the world." The technical comparison. Post-war analysis confirmed the gap between the two aircraft. Mitsubishi A6M Zero, maximum speed 332 km/h, service ceiling 33,000 ft but struggled above 25,000. Climb rate 3,100 ft per minute, dropping sharply with altitude. Range 1930 miles, impressive for its time. Armament consisted of two 7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannon with limited ammunition. Early models had no armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Lockheed P-38L Lightning, maximum speed over 400 mph, service ceiling $44,000 FT, and a climb rate of 4,050 ft per minute at sea level. Range 1,600 miles with drop tanks. Armament included 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all concentrated in the nose. It also had strong pilot armor and self-sealing tanks as standard. The numbers made clear that the Zero had been built for a style of war where maneuvering skill and individual bravery mattered most. The P-38 embodied a new reality, industrialized warfare where technology, mass production, and constant improvement decided the outcome. Industrial strength. The Lightning's edge reflected the vast difference in industrial power. Lockheed produced more than 10,000 P-38s during the war. Japan built roughly 10,000 Zeros, but spread out over a longer period and with declining quality. American assembly line methods, refined through automobile production, allowed rapid construction of high-quality aircraft. The Allison engines that powered the Lightning were engineering masterpieces with advanced superchargers, precision parts, and durable metallurgy far beyond what Japan could match. While Japanese engines often needed hand-fitting and careful adjustments, American engines were interchangeable, easier to maintain, and far more reliable. The training gap. By 1944, the differences in pilot preparation were staggering. American P-38 pilots went through specialized twin-engine courses with more than 100 hours in trainers before moving to the Lightning. They practiced engine outflying, oxygen system use at high altitudes, advanced gunnery with camera guns, formation tactics, and survival training. Japanese training by that stage had been cut down to just 50-100 hours of basic flying. Ammunition was scarce, combat training minimal, and emphasis was placed on spirit and sacrifice rather than tactics. Many were rushed into service for kamikaze missions. The results were predictable. Americans entered combat as well-trained professionals, while Japanese pilots were often barely prepared. Tactical transformation. The Lightning changed the very nature of air combat. Turning dogfights, the standard since World War I, became obsolete. While the P-38 could not outturn the A6M2 at speeds under 200 mph, its superior climb and speed allowed new tactics. U.S. pilots developed the high-side pass, a diving from above and behind, unleashing a burst of concentrated fire, then climbing back out before the Zero could react. These boom-and-zoom tactics shredded Japanese formations. Attempts to adapt, such as placing fighters at different altitudes or using cloud cover, were defeated by the Lightning's reach and speed. The psychological factor. Every encounter reinforced the same lesson. The Zero was outclassed. The Lightning wasn't just a fighter. It was a system of technology, training, and tactics Japan could not match. For Japanese pilots, the P-38 became a symbol of inevitability. For Americans, it was proof that engineering, industry, and preparation had replaced the old code of the individual warrior. The P-38, Lightning's unusual shape, was more than just a design choice. It became a weapon in itself. Its twin-boom structure looked strange and intimidating to Japanese pilots, who at first dismissed it as too heavy and awkward to be effective. But soon that distinct outline turned into a dreaded sight. Long before a battle even began, the silhouette of the Lightning signaled American technological dominance. Ground crews later recalled that even rumors of P-38s nearby would make Japanese pilots hesitate, delay missions, or demand extra escorts. Among Japanese airmen, it earned the nickname "two planes, one pilot," a mix of confusion about its design and respect for its strength. Strategic consequences. The P-38's advantages went far beyond individual dogfights. Japanese planners had built their strategy around the idea that, with roughly equal aircraft, their superior warrior spirit would decide the outcome. The Lightning proved otherwise. Its performance showed that technology could tilt the balance so far that courage alone no longer mattered. This harsh reality forced Japan into desperate decisions, accelerating kamikaze tactics once conventional combat became hopeless, pulling their best surviving pilots back to defend the home islands, abandoning large-scale offensive air operations by mid-1944, and shifting resources into experimental wonder weapon projects. Admiral Soemu Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, admitted privately in October 1944, "We no longer have an air force capable of conventional operations. The American fighters, especially the P-38, have eliminated our ability to contest the skies." the logistics and maintenance advantage. At first, U.S. leaders worried the Lightning's twin engines would be too complex to maintain in the rough conditions of the Pacific. But instead, it highlighted another American strength: organized logistics and advanced maintenance systems. Despite operating from primitive bases, P-38 squadrons kept over 80% of their aircraft mission ready. In contrast, Japanese units flying simpler single-engine planes often struggled to keep even 50% operational by 1944. The difference came down to approach. American ground crews, many with backgrounds in civilian aviation and automotive industries, created specialized tools, standardized repair methods, and scheduled preventive maintenance. Japanese crews relied more on individual skill and improvisation, which couldn't keep up with the demands of modern warfare. Navigation technology. The Lightning also brought a critical edge in navigation. With radio direction finding equipment, P-38s could fly long distances over the vast Pacific, lock onto radio beacons, return to base in poor weather, and hit precise targets on time. Japanese pilots mostly depended on dead reckoning and visual navigation, which limited their range and accuracy. The famous Yamamoto interception mission is a prime example, covering 435 miles of open ocean and arriving at the exact right spot, at the exact right time. Japanese technology at the time simply couldn't have pulled off such a mission, breaking Japanese naval aviation. The Imperial Japanese Navy had built its entire war strategy around carrier-based aviation, but as the P-38 and other U.S. fighters gained dominance, that foundation collapsed. Carrier groups rebuilt after Midway were shredded again during the island campaigns. By 1944, Japanese carriers often sailed with air groups at half strength made up of poorly trained rookies. Vice Admiral Saburo Sakai, commanding the first mobile fleet, admitted before the Battle of the Philippine Sea, "Our pilots are not ready for combat against American fighters. They can barely land on carriers, much less fight P-38s and Hellcats. We are sending them to certain death, cultural shock and change." The P-38 also forced Japan to confront a deeper truth. The Bushido Code, which celebrated spiritual strength and personal courage, collapsed in the face of America's industrialized warfare. Younger Japanese officers began to question the very foundation of their military doctrine. Pilots returning from battle told stories of American technological superiority that completely contradicted years of propaganda about Western weakness and Japanese invincibility. Economic reality. The cost of a single P-38 in 1944 was about $97,000. Expensive, yet America built them by the thousands. Japan, with far fewer resources, couldn't keep up. The aluminum needed for one Lightning was more than some Japanese factories received in an entire month by 1944. Precision parts like turbo-superchargers, constant speed propellers, and advanced instruments all represented industrial capabilities Japan had never developed. What the pilots themselves said. The most striking confirmation of the Lightning's impact comes from Japanese pilots themselves. Even after the war, men trained never to admit weakness openly acknowledged its superiority. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai described it this way: "The P-38 would patrol above the altitude at which the Zero could fly. Their great speed at high altitudes allowed them to maneuver into the most advantageous positions. Then the big fighters would plunge from the sky to smash into the hapless Zero fighters. The final blow, Reconnaissance." Perhaps the greatest humiliation wasn't just in combat, but in what else the P-38 could do. Its reconnaissance versions provided about 90% of the aerial photography in the Pacific. Japanese bases, troop movements, and supply routes were constantly being mapped. The same plane that outflew them in combat was also documenting their every weakness. The P-38 F-5 reconnaissance model, with its weapons removed but full performance intact, could photograph targets at altitudes no Japanese fighter could reach. Their attempts to intercept often failed before they even got close. The lasting legacy. The shock of facing the P-38 stayed with Japanese pilots long after the war. It reshaped Japan's approach to aviation, military planning, and even culture. Many of the surviving pilots later became strong supporters of technology and modernization in post-war Japan. They had learned the hard way that bravery alone could not win a war without the tools to match. The experiences of Japanese pilots during the war shaped how Japan approached technology and industry in the years that followed. Saburo Sakai, who went on to become a successful businessman after the war, often reflected on the hard lessons he and his comrades had learned from facing the P-38 Lightning. As he put it, "The Lightning taught us that we must never again fall behind technologically. It showed us that in modern war it is industrial strength, not warrior spirit, that determines victory." The race for innovation. The P-38's development highlighted one of America's biggest advantages: the ability to solve technical problems quickly and roll improvements straight into production. When pilots reported compressibility problems in dives, dive flaps were added. When crews complained about freezing cockpits, improved heating systems were installed. Concerns about sluggish roll rates were solved with hydraulically boosted ailerons. Each issue raised in combat was met with a practical solution in the next model. Japan, constrained by scarce resources and rigid institutions, could not keep pace. By 1945, the Zero flying in combat was essentially the same aircraft that had attacked Pearl Harbor, with only minor adjustments. The P-38L of 1945, however, was a completely different machine from the P-38E of 1942. Faster, tougher, and more advanced. Final judgments. General George Kenney, commander of Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific, summarized it bluntly. The P-38 pilots flying at great height chose when and where they wanted to fight, with disastrous results for Japanese pilots. The Lightning's ability to dictate when to engage and when to disengage marked a revolution in air combat, one that Japanese doctrine never solved. The numbers themselves tell the story. By the end of the war, the two top American aces flying P-38s had shot down 78 Japanese planes between them. In comparison, Japan's highest surviving ace had 64 victories earned over 6 years of combat. Japan simply could not absorb those kinds of losses. The arithmetic of attrition was impossible to overcome. The bigger picture. The Lightning's superiority went beyond its speed or firepower. It revealed a deeper contrast between the two nations. Japan entered the war expecting that courage and warrior spirit could overcome material disadvantages, aiming for a short, decisive conflict. The United States prepared for a long struggle, one that would be won by technology, production, and innovation. For Japanese pilots, the shock of encountering the P-38 was the shock of meeting modern warfare itself. The Lightning represented the organized application of science, engineering, and mass production to combat. Against that, even the proud samurai tradition was powerless. The human cost behind the statistics were thousands of young lives. Many Japanese pilots were sent into combat with less than 100 hours of training, flying outdated aircraft against the P-38. They knew they stood little chance. Letters recovered after the war reveal their grim awareness. One young pilot, writing before his final mission, told his mother, "Tomorrow I will face the twin-tailed devils. I do not expect to return. They fly higher and faster than we can imagine. I will do my duty, but I know it is hopeless." He was killed by P-38s over Rabaul in March 1944, one of thousands of young men sacrificed to a technological gap courage alone could not close. Lasting influence. The Lightning's impact stretched far beyond World War II. It directly influenced the Cold War era, inspiring the design of twin-engine, high-altitude interceptors in both the United States and the Soviet Union. The idea of using advanced technology to achieve overwhelming advantage became a permanent part of U.S. military doctrine. For Japan, the lesson was equally lasting. Their post-war self-defense forces emphasized quality over quantity, investing in advanced technology rather than mass numbers. The trauma of fighting with inferior equipment left deep marks on Japanese military planning, ensuring they would never again underestimate the importance of technological parity. The end of an era. The inability of Japanese pilots to outclimb or outrun the P-38 Lightning marked the end of an era in air warfare. The romantic age of the lone fighter pilot, where skill and bravery decided the outcome, ended in the skies of the Pacific. It was replaced by industrial warfare, where technology, logistics, and innovation were decisive. Saburo Sakai later summed up the truth with painful honesty. The P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot. It wasn't just a faster, higher-flying aircraft. It represented a way of war that Japan could not match. For the pilots who survived, the lesson was clear. In modern war, courage without technology is not heroism, it is futility. The P-38 Lightning did more than shoot down Japanese aircraft. It shattered an entire worldview, proving that honor and bravery alone could not stop an enemy armed with science, factories, and innovation. The Zero, which had seemed unstoppable in 1941, was obsolete by 1943. Pilots who had spent years perfecting aerobatic maneuvers found those skills useless against an opponent that refused to fight on their terms. In the end, the twin-tailed devil that haunted Japanese pilots was more than a plane. It was the embodiment of American industry, technological innovation, and modern warfare. Saburo Sakai gave the last word when he said, "The P-38 taught us the hardest lesson of all, that the age of the samurai was over. In the skies over the Pacific we met the future and it destroyed us." The shock of that encounter still echoes today. A reminder that in war it is technology and industrial strength that decide the outcome, not tradition or valor. Japanese pilots who could not outrun or outclimb the P-38 Lightning learned this lesson at the cost of their lives, their aircraft, and ultimately, their nation's ambitions. The Lightning was America's answer, delivered at 400 miles per hour from 30,000 feet, with a precision and power that no amount of courage could withstand.